Wars aren't won by strategy and fighting spirit alone. Technology, development, and policy all play a key role in one nation's victory over another. But what happens when these go wrong? Backwards technology, stagnant development, and stupid decisions have all led otherwise functional military forces to an early grave. In this video, we shed some light on some of the worst policy mistakes of the Second World War. Lurking silently beneath the waves, submarines are the perfect ambush predators. With one swift torpedo strike, they can spell the end for a ship and its crew. But to do this, their torpedoes have to actually work. The US Navy began the war with a small supply of largely untested torpedoes. The institution responsible for naval procurement, the Bureau of Ordnance, had faced serious cutbacks during the Great Depression. Each torpedo cost them about $170,000, and they just didn't have the budget to blow them up in testing. Torpedoes were also extremely complex to manufacture, limiting supply. Until November 1943, US Navy subs were armed with the infamous Mark 14 torpedo. This weapon had four major problems. 1. It ran deeper than set. 2. The contact exploder didn't work. 3. The magnetic exploder went off early, and 4. It often ran in a circle and hit the submarine that fired it. With a weapon like this, a submariner's job was practically impossible. In April 1943, USS Tunny was positioned to fire on 3 Japanese aircraft carriers. The captain fired every tube, releasing 10 torpedoes. 7 exploded early, while the remaining 3 swam off in the wrong direction. The carriers escaped undamaged. In July, USS Tinosa fired 15 torpedoes at a Japanese tanker. Of those, 1 exploded early, 3 dived away into the depths, and no less than 12 clanged off the target's hull without exploding. When sub-captains began reporting these serious and dangerous faults, the Bureau of Ordnance initially refused to believe them. It took 21 months of constant harassment to get the problems fixed, and once they were, the US submarine fleet became a potent threat in the Pacific. While the US Navy did get its torpedoes sorted out eventually, the Japanese were still having issues right to the end. Though their problems weren't technological. Instead, they were giving new meaning to the term infighting. As the Japanese Empire modernized in the 19th century, the old feudal clans donned new hats and became the politicians, admirals, and generals of the new age. Their old rivalries were as fierce as ever and effectively split the empire into 2 factions. One faction controlled the army and the other controlled the navy. Between them was a sea of hatred. The army claimed control of the land while the navy dominated the seas, but this caused more problems than it solved. Neither side could agree on whose job it was to intercept American air raids. The army claimed the bombers flew over the ocean to get to Japan, so it was the navy's problem. The navy argued the planes bombed ground targets, so it was the army's problem. Meanwhile, no one was putting up a strong defense against air raids, and Japan's cities were leveled. Things were so dysfunctional that the navy maintained its own land force with, among other things, paratroopers, a tank corps, and artillery. The army followed suit, operating their own aircraft carrier and submarines. Additionally, almost none of the army and navy's ammunition and machine parts were interchangeable. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and it's genuinely amazing that Japan stood up to the Allied onslaught as long as it did. In January 1945, the British deployed their latest tank, the Comet, on the battlefield. It was cause for celebration among the men of the tank corps. Why? Because for the first time in the entire war, the British made a tank that wasn't a death trap. Just like the Americans, the British were keen to cut military spending during the financial hardship of the Great Depression. The Royal Navy and RAF were seen as key for national defense and ate most of the military budget. The army was stuck with the leftovers. The army's conservative leaders planned on fighting the Great War a second time, so they envisioned an ideal tank, then split it into 3. They wanted lightweight and fast recon tanks, heavily armored infantry support tanks, and quick cruisers to destroy other tanks. They barely had the budget to develop 1 tank, and now they were developing 3. Development was fraught with difficulty, and standardization across the designs was non-existent. When they were put into action during the Battle of France, these issues began to show. The cruiser-type tank designs were difficult to manufacture, and therefore only a few were available in 1940. There simply weren't enough to stop a panzer attack. As for the infantry support Matilda Mark I tanks, their armor was thick enough to protect the crew, but their machine guns couldn't dent enemy armor. After the loss of nearly all their vehicles at Dunkirk, the Brits decided any tank was better than no tank, so they continued to produce inferior vehicles. Throughout North Africa and Italy, British tanks were always outgunned and outclassed by their enemy. This only changed when huge numbers of Shermans arrived from the United States. From supplies shortages to obsolete equipment and Mussolini's antics, the Italian army of World War II had put up with a lot. But none of these factors crippled its effectiveness alone. That was done by its officers. What are we talking about? Poor leadership. Many of the issues fascist Italy faced during the war can be traced back to uninspired, incompetent, or corrupt leadership. Pre-war Italy was poorer and generally less developed than the major powers of Europe. The Italian middle class, where the officer corps is traditionally recruited from, was much smaller than that of Germany, France, or Britain. Italy was also very culturally divided, with officers from the northern and southernmost regions often unable to understand each other. The National Army had only existed for 70 odd years and tradition was weak. On a small scale, elite units such as the Bersaglieri marksmen and the Alpini mountain troops maintained their traditions, but they didn't exist for regular units, where officers were encouraged to make political connections instead of learning the art of war. Corruption and nepotism were rife, and this was commonly how officers were promoted. The officers received a greater food allocation than the men, meaning they ate well while the soldiers went hungry. German officers were outraged when they discovered Italian soldiers begging Wehrmacht cooks for food. Rommel summarized the German view on the Italians simply: the ordinary Italian soldiers are good, their officers are worthless. On July 23, 1942, Rostov-on-Don was abandoned by its Soviet defenders. The city was given up without much of a fight. The fleeing Soviets were demoralized and weak, desperate to avoid the seemingly unstoppable Axis advance. Stalin was furious and responded with the now infamous Order 227. It stipulated every soldier must fight to the death, established penal units, and gave special blocking units permission to execute anyone accused of panicking or cowardice. It applied to officers the same as it did to soldiers, demanding they take not one step back. In the 3 months after its inception, 24,000 soldiers were sent to penal battalions and 1,000 more were executed under Order 227. Officers could find themselves in hot water for failing to carry out Stalin's orders fast enough, so they went overboard catching supposed deserters and spies. Some soldiers were thrown into penal units for making jokes or cooking bad food, others for stopping to help wounded comrades. Order 227 was supposed to galvanize Soviet morale and help them better fight the enemy, but it had the opposite effect instead. Commanders were forced to waste manpower on useless blocking units and lost valuable officers to the penal battalions. Most of the time, the blocking units were stuck in the rear pulling guard duty and cleaning latrines while the other soldiers fought at the front. After 3 months, the Red Army high-ups decided they could no longer afford this colossal waste of manpower and scrapped the idea. Speaking of colossal wastes of resources, we have the German late war tank developments, specifically the Panzer VIII or Maus. Development of this steel behemoth began in 1942, but it wasn't until June 1944 that the design kinks had been worked out and a prototype was ready for testing. The Maus was monstrous, weighing close to 200 tons. It packed a 128mm main gun with a coaxial 75mm gun and needed a 12-cylinder aviation engine to get it moving. Its 3.7 meter width and incredible weight prevented the tank from crossing normal bridges. The solution? A second mouse would feed the first electrical power while it drove across the riverbed. Using a snorkel, the tank could submerge in up to 8 meters of water. That's right, in the late stages of war, when Germany needed all of its resources to fight the encroaching Allies, Hitler was building submarine tanks. The project was ludicrous from the start. Experience battling on the Eastern Front had taught the Germans that maneuverability and speed could be just as important for winning a battle as armor and guns. Heinz Guderian, the general in charge of the Panzer forces, tried to tell Hitler this, but the Führer refused to listen. The steel from just one mouse could have built 21 108mm howitzers. When you need every weapon you can get, which would you rather have? Those were 6 stories of the worst military policy mistakes of the Second World War. But what do you think? Why do you think the Bureau of Ordnance refused to listen to the submarine captains? How much do you think Italy's poor wartime performance was down to leadership? Did you know the Germans built a submarine tank at the end of the war? Let us know all that and more in the comments section below, guys. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.